I hope you're having a fantastic day. Let's go ahead and jump right on into our first of multiple video lessons we're going to be doing today. So let me just set this all up so that we can jump right on in. Oops. Technology, right? So what we're going to be doing through the course of the first week introduction videos is kind of introducing the managerial economics concepts, what it means at like that 3,000 foot level when we're kind of thinking about like what the overall perspective of this is. And then we're going to go back and do a lot of review of microeconomics. I know when I was reading through everybody's discussion post that some people had mentioned that it's been a long time since they've taken microeconomics. It might have in some cases been years since they took microeconomics. So we're going to go on through and just kind of remind you how the graphs work, what the relationships are, things like consumer surplus, producer surplus, what do those really mean? So this week's going to be a lot of review of core terminology. So first off, we need to start thinking about, okay, well, managerial economics, I must have a manager. So what do we call a manager in the economics world? Well, in the economics world, a manager is someone who directs resources. Now, you don't have to remember this part, but the resources are typically land, labor, and capital. So where do you put your business? Do you move to a new location? How many employees do you hire on the day shift versus the night shift? How long are they working? What are their responsibilities? Or capital. So like how many registers do I need? Or how many ovens do I need to run a successful pizza parlor? Managing all of those resources and making decisions, that's the key roles of a manager. So they're the ones who purchase inputs that are used in the production of the firm output. Because at the end of the day, we're wondering what's that firm producing and how are we able to produce it for a low cost, right? Or at a minimum cost for the quality that we want. So these are people who direct the product prices and quantity decisions. They figure out how much money's or what price is going to be on the sticker tag and how many are we going to make and put on the shelves that week, right? So then we also have to kind of pair that with the idea of economics. So economics is the science of making decisions and choices in the face of scarcity. You do not have all the hours in the day. You're going to have to figure out how to allocate so much in between coming to class or going and hanging out with your family or going to work. You don't have all the resources you would like when it comes to money. We do not have unlimited money. We do not have unlimited free time. We don't have unlimited resources at our business to make every single thing that we have an idea for. But there's scarcity involved in each of these resources. So we have to think about how do we make decisions on how to best utilize those resources, right? And that's kind of the key point of economics. Like everybody likes to think that we study markets and stock markets and everything else, but at the end of the day, what we're looking at is how do we just make decisions and logical decisions? Because these are important, because scarcity, the not having things, implies that there's a trade-off. There's trade-offs in your life in between watching an extra one of these videos for class and the 30 minutes you could have gone for a walk. There's a trade-off in between purchasing the blue aglets for the tennis shoes that you're building and purchasing the purple aglets, right? Because you purchase blue ones, you don't have all the finances to buy the purple ones. There's lots of different trade-offs that we have when it comes to these sorts of things. So let's put it together. What does managerial economics mean? Well, managerial economics is someone who directs the scarce resources. It's a manager who typically is in charge of resources coming in and directing and making choices in between scarce resources. For example, I got $200,000 in my budget and I got to find out if I'm going to redo the entire point of service system and maybe put in a self-service counter for people, or am I instead going to use that money to be able to finance purchasing 2 additional laborers who will come in and help run this business? What are the decisions that we're making? Because there's only so much money and there's only so much space in the business. How do we allocate it? We have to make crucial market decisions in the face of this scarcity. So what managerial economics will teach you over the next few weeks is a little bit about how we go about making decisions or evaluating potential decisions in the event of scarcity. Some example questions. Should a firm purchase a component from other manufacturers or produce them in-house? Like, should I make this or should I purchase it from others? Right? A good example of this is Crocs. So Crocs, you know, those ugly shoes that people didn't really like, but they're also super comfy. They stopped closed their last production plant in the United States because they instead were able to outsource a lot of the pieces of their shoes that would be made in factories elsewhere and then shipped in, then assembled and branded here. That's something that they had to decide on, that component. Would it be made by manufacturers or themselves in-house? And they had to make some choices based upon that. Other ones can be like, should a firm specialize in making a type of computer or produce several types of computers? How many computers should the firm produce? At what price should we sell them? So these are key ideas that we're going to have no matter what industry you're in. Now, I tend to use computers and pizza a lot as examples, but that's just because they're a little bit easier for me to remember, but we can go through them over time. So there's some economics of effective management, right? Because at the end of the day, a bad manager can ruin a business. I have spent my fair share of time working low-end jobs. I worked at like Staples for years in the easy tech department where I had managers on top of me. And I learned quickly that a great manager can make a business very successful, while a bad manager who improperly utilizes when people are scheduled, or what sort of equipment do we buy, or inventory stocking, that can quickly harm a business. So we have to think about certain things if we're going to be an effective management, right? Or an effective manager who not only keeps people happy, but keeps production running at reasonable costs. And we need to first identify goals and constraints, right? What is the goal of our business and what constraints are put upon it? Would we like to produce 200 pairs of shoes? And are we able to resource enough aglets and shoelaces for that amount of shoes? Maybe we can only get 100. So it's something that we're going to have to think about. Maybe we're going to have to change production brands. We need to recognize the nature and importance of profits. Profits are how we're able to get more resources in the future, or to be able to increase our spending power. So we have to recognize why they're important and sort of how they work. Because a lot of the time, these profits are not just money in your pocket, right? A lot of the time, profits are for the purpose of being able to help grow or build for the next step. We also have to understand incentives. So as an effective manager, you need to realize when there might be good incentives or bad incentives. Like, for example, there might be a decision that you make where, okay, if I have 3 people working the back to school teachers day, then that's going to be great. We'll have extra people. We'll be able to open up all the registers, and we'll have more teachers who come in because they're happy that we can go quickly. That's a good incentive. We also might have bad incentives. We might have, okay, well, we'll get like a one-time payment for the shipment order, and it's a really large one-time payment, but then they get to use this into perpetuity forever. Well, that seems like a good idea now, but what if we're still maintaining these resources 12 years down the line with no additional income? You know, that might be a bad incentive. So we have to think about that. And with that, we have to understand the markets. How are people demanding your product versus how are you able to supply your product? And where is the mismatch there? Then we have the time value of money. $100 today is very, very different than what $100 50 years ago was. $100 50 years ago had a lot more buying power than it does today. 100 years, 50 years from now, we'll also have way different buying power. So we have to think about the time value of money. Is it good to just put something into a savings account that never grows interest? Or would it be better to invest it because inflation happens and your money will have less purchasing power? And then we have to think about the idea of marginal analysis. So you'll hear me use the phrase marginal analysis a lot, or marginal benefit, or marginal cost. If you ever hear the word marginal in an economics lecture, that just means one more of something. So what is the marginal benefit if I produce one more phone? Or what is the marginal cost of me having one more cup of tea? Like, this costs some water, this costs like more dishes that have to be done later. There's some sort of cost for one more of something. And that's what marginal tends to mean. So the goals of managers have to be well-defined goals of efficient management strategies. So in this course, we're going to try to talk a little bit about what are efficient management strategies, and then think about how do we think about goals, right? And those goals tend to come in 2 flavors. They're either related to accounting profit or economic profit, and understanding both is very, very important, because if you don't understand that there's a huge difference between accounting profit and economic profit, you might see the numbers going up on your balance sheet, but not understand necessarily why you would have been way better off if you had decided to make a different product. Or you might have been way better off if you had not delayed production of a certain line for a while. So accounting profit and economic profit are two different concepts. Let's talk about the first one. So accounting profit, well, accountants measure a firm's profit as money in, money out, right? And this ensures that the firm pays the correct amount of taxes. It shows investors how much their funds are being used. And in this, we have to think about where profit, our overall profit, equals the total revenue, so all the money in, minus the total cost, all the money out. Right? Accountants tend to use the IRS services rules based on different standards that are established by the financial accounting standards. The reason for this is so that we can properly do taxes and we can properly understand exactly how much money is in the bank account. And we can properly understand what's happening with depreciation. But accounting profit is not the same as economic profit. And economic profit is the one that economists are concerned about. Economic profit measures a firm's profit to enable them to predict a firm's decision. So what this basically means, remember, accounting profit is total revenue minus total cost. With economic profit, it's total revenue minus total cost, but this total cost also includes opportunity cost of production. What else could I have done with that pizza oven? Could I have instead rented it out to the Domino's across the street and made as much money for it? What about the opportunity cost of my time? So I'm working at this pizza shop. I'm making like $20,000 at the end of the day because we don't have a lot of profits. But if I would have gone and worked for a different pizza chain, maybe I could have made $84,000, right? So there's a huge opportunity cost of giving up that $84,000 job to work this $20,000 job. We have to think about what those costs really mean, and understanding that opportunity cost can help us direct managerial decisions on where we're going. So with the firm's opportunity cost, we have to think about the opportunity cost of production. So a firm's opportunity cost of production is the value of the best alternative use of that resource. So let's say, what's a good one? Let's say that I have a company and we're producing things and we need paper clips, right? Because I got my nice little box of Staples brand paper clips right here, which I actually thought were Staples because it says Staples on the box, and I should have known better because I used to work there. But these are paper clips, in fact. But we got a bunch of them, right? All right, let's think about what like the opportunity cost these paper clips are. Maybe what I use these paper clips for is when I'm sending a contract to a customer, I put a paper clip at the top. Okay, cool. What else could I have done with this resource? Well, maybe the next best alternative, instead of using it to bind things for the customers, maybe I could have used the paper clips to better organize the stock that I have in the back of my warehouse and be able to keep the files together better there. Maybe that could make it a more efficient system so my workers can find things faster and they're able to produce things faster. A small difference like that is actually very large at the end of the day. And that's something simple like Staples. Let's think about something like a lawnmower. Right? Let's say that you have a landscaping company and you own this super cool lawnmower. Okay, well, maybe there's an opportunity cost to producing with that lawnmower. Like I'm producing nice, beautiful, clean yards. I go and I lawnmower all the houses in the neighborhood. Well, what else could I have done with that lawnmower? Maybe the money I spent on the lawnmower, I instead could have gotten like two lesser value lawnmowers and been able to do twice as many yards. Maybe that amount of money that I put into the lawnmower could have been better spent hiring a receptionist to be able to answer the phone, or an administrative assistant to help us book appointments. There are other things that we could have done with these things. When we think of opportunity cost of production, so the opportunity cost of producing something, we tend to have these in three different types of categories. First is the opportunity cost of things that are bought in the market. So we'll talk about each of them coming up. The second one's the opportunity cost of things that are owned by the firm, and then things that are supplied by the firm. So resources that are bought in the market, these tend to be things that are used in the production process. So for example, if I'm putting together, I don't know, Nintendo Switches, right? So I just pull things off my desk all the time. I hope you don't get sick of it because this is how we learn. So let's say I wanted to produce the Nintendo Switch. Okay, well, maybe I would like to buy in the market these little buttons, right? Maybe it's too expensive for me to produce myself. I'd like to buy them in the market and to be able to use them in my product. Well, maybe instead of buying them in the market, the opportunity cost, the next best thing I could have done instead of putting into the Nintendo Switch is maybe put it into the next product. Maybe put these little buttons into the DS, or if they decided to ever redo that one, or whatever the next brand of Nintendo is, I do not know. But if you know, please let me know. I feel that I'm getting older every day. and kind of losing touch with the cool things. Anyways, so the firm incurs opportunity cost of production because the firms could have bought different resources. I could have bought blue buttons instead of red buttons. I could have bought white buttons instead of green buttons. I could have produced it myself in-house as opposed to doing something else. So we have to think about what the next best alternative would be for everything. Then we have the opportunity cost of resources that are owned by the firm. So the firm owns capital. So capital are things like machines, they're tangible, non-human things that are used in production, right? So it's not my awesome manager. It is not my super great front of house workers. It's not my super duper awesome back of house managers, right? What we're talking about with capital is the physical machines that are used to be able to produce a good or service. If the firm owns capital and uses it to produce output, then the firm incurs an opportunity cost. I think I also like just referring to pizza because in my first semester teaching, I had a student who owned a pizza store. So we talked about it a lot. But let's assume that I had a pizza shop. We're going to call this like Plemmons Pizza Emporium because I'm Dr. Plemmons, but Plemmons Pizza Emporium. Okay, well, let's say that I owned 2 pizza ovens, very large pizza ovens, very good. They do their job, right? Well, what else could I have done that or done with those goods? Instead of using them myself and maybe making a couple $1,000s a year because I'm a terrible cook and no one should trust me to make pizza, maybe I instead could have rented those 2 ovens to another company who wants to come in and make pizza. Maybe during the downtime when I'm not working and the pizza shop is closed, maybe I could rent those ovens out to maybe a bakery that wants to come in and do their early morning bread. Maybe those 2 ovens I could have rented to Domino's so that they're able to get it for a cheaper rate and I'm able to get some resources back on it because they would be able to produce a higher volume or better quality, and then they're able to pay me. They might have made more money in that way, right? There's other opportunities for resources that are owned by the firm. The firm's opportunity cost of using this capital, the capital that it owns, is called the implicit rental rate of capital. Because you notice what I said, I could rent out these ovens to Domino's. I could rent out these ovens to the bakery. The implicit rental rate is kind of what we could get in return for letting other people use that capital. All right, then after that, we need to think about resources supplied by the firm's owner. I remember when I was reading through your introductions that many of you had said that you own businesses or you plan to own businesses. Well, we need to think about the opportunity cost of things that you bring in, right? Maybe you bring in your time, you bring in your experience, you bring in your entrepreneurship, you bring in some of your personal supplies while you're still getting off the ground, right? Well, typically the return to entrepreneurship is profit. As you are leading the managers and you're leading putting together the land, labor, and capital, you will receive a profit from that. The profit that entrepreneurs can expect to receive on average is called normal profit. Now, there are some years where normal profit is not what you get, right? There might be some sort of wild event, or there might be something crazy that happened, or maybe your product blew up on TikTok and everybody ended up purchasing it. But in most years, we call this normal profit. Normal profit is the cost of entrepreneurship. It is the payment that you should get or the value of your time and resources and experience that you are bringing into the production of a good or service, right? And there's next best options for your time that you bring into a company. For every week that I spent working in a pizza shop or trying to manage a pizza shop that I make, Plemmons Pizza Emporium, there were better uses for my time. I could have taught a really fun MBA course with super cool students, right? Like there's different opportunity costs for that time. Normal profit at the end of the day is the cost of this entrepreneurship, and that's sort of neat. So when we're thinking about all these different types of opportunity costs, what else we could be doing with our time, what else we could be doing with our supplies, we also go to another key concept of managerial economics. And I am so sorry that these first few lessons are going to be very terminology heavy, but I got to get us speaking the same language before we can start going into the deeper pieces of this course. But the next part is kind of the 5 forces of industry profitability. I know this is a lot on the screen. Do not freak out. We're going to talk through it. So at the very top, When we're thinking about how we get sustainable industry profits, we're making a profit at our business, which sometimes profit can just be losing the least amount of resources or the least amount of money, but sustainable industry profit, or we're getting a profit. What do we need to consider? First, we need to think about entry. Okay, how much does it, what are the entry costs for us to start a business? What are the sunk costs, the money that I'm going to put into this business that I am never going to get back out? The time and resources I'm going to put into this business that I'm never going to get back out? The network effects, what is this going to do to my network? The switching cost, how much is it going to cost me to switch from making calzones to pizzas, right? Government restraints, we're going to talk a lot about regulation and how that affects companies during this. How is you starting a business going to affect reputation, economics of scale, speed of your ability to adjust to the changes in the market? Understanding those entry pieces is a key part of sustainable industry profits, because if you have a good idea of what your real sunk costs are, and you have a good idea of how much you can save if you scale up your business, and you have a good idea of what it's really going to cost from switching to different items, you can make really smart entry decisions. Another thing that kind of affects the sustainable industry profits is the idea of the power of the buyers, right? If you are selling a product, at the end of the day, you need people to purchase that product. And those buyers, they have a lot of power over the decisions of the firm. Well, first we have to think about how concentrated are the buyers. If I am selling snowshoes, those only really sell up in the Northeast. Someone in Texas or someone in Florida very rarely ever has to buy snowshoes. We might have a concentration of buyers. If I'm selling SIUE merch, which you all should totally get a hoodie, because their hoodies are very comfortable. You don't have to, but I'm just letting you know their hoodies are comfortable. That's a very concentrated buyer market. It's only people who are either located nearby Edwardsville or who are taking classes through Edwardsville from a little bit further away. We also have to think about the value of substitute products or services. If the SIUE hoodies get super, super expensive, then people might buy St. Louis hoodies, or they might buy just Illinois in general hoodies, right? And there might be relationship specific investments. So if I'm wanting to attract buyers, it might be that I have to invest time going to places where these buyers are located and try to get them to have a relationship with my product or brand. And then I have to think about how much is it going to cost for them to switch to me. We see a good example of this when it comes to the cell phone industry, right? So you probably see commercials if you still have cable. I know many people don't have cable anymore, but if you still have cable, you probably see commercials that are like, oh, well, you can get a new phone with us and we'll even pay your switching cost. The reason why places like Verizon and AT&T and T-Mobile offer things such as customer switching costs is because they realize that to be able to sever a phone line tends to be very, very expensive for people. So one solution that we might have is instead, okay, well, if I would really like to make these profits, I'm going to create a relationship with these buyers. I'm going to pay for some of that switching costs so that they're actually able to change to me, because if they have to pay it themselves, they might not. Right? Those are things that we have to understand, the power of the buyer and our sustainable industry profits. Next one, substitute and complements, right? We need to think about what else could our buyers be purchasing, right? We need to think about the price and value of surrogate products. If my cell phone plan gets way too expensive, they could switch to Metro PCS, they could switch to T-Mobile, they could switch to something else. If my pizzas get too expensive, they could go to Domino's, they could go to Papa John's, they could decide to instead go get calzones, they could instead decide to go get a lower cost spaghetti. Right? There's price differences and there's value differences that might have substitutes where people are willing to substitute their product. There's also complements that you have to think about. Let's say that I produce jelly, which I mean, I have a giant garden out back. I tend to use a lot of the fruit and I make jelly for like my friends. But let's say I sold it. Well, if I sold jam and jelly, then how people purchase my product is really going to depend on the price of peanut butter, right? Most of the time, people use jelly for peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. If the price of peanut butter skyrockets, my price may not have changed at all, but since less people are now making those sandwiches, my sales might be affected. Understanding the substitutes and complements within our network of both substitute goods, where people might switch to something else, and complement goods, things that need to be used together, are very, very important for also our industry profits. All right, we got 2 more to go, so let's get on through this. Let's think about the power of input suppliers. if I am extremely dependent on one input, let's say we're back to the Nintendo Switch and maybe there is only one person who makes this type of button, then I'm in trouble, right? That is one person who has a lot of control over the price of their product. They might be able to raise their price by a lot and I'd still have to pay them because they might be the only people who are providing this good. But what if I instead switch to a different type of buttons? Maybe, I don't know, let's think about like the ones from the N64, right? A much larger, blockier buttons. Everybody produces those. So then my input supplier wouldn't have a lot of power because there are 30 other people who I can go purchase them from, right? So the power of the input supplier might reduce if there's not much supplier concentration. But the more concentrated and the more dependent you become on one supplier, well, then that affects how you need to consider your inputs. Is this something that the price can get raised on? Is this something that if that company goes under, you may not be able to produce your product because another company went down? What's the relationship that you have to maintain with that input supplier? Can you have a hard fist and put it down and be like, I am only paying this much? Well, that's typically only if there's a lot of different alternatives in the market, because you might not be able to continue that relationship with one supplier. Is it if only one person produces this and they have a lot of demand that we want to be very, very nice to them and offer them higher costs and things like that to be able to incentivize these input suppliers to prioritize us? There's also a lot of government constraints on like what the relationships in between input suppliers can be, so they're not considered collusions or monopolies. There's also supplier switching cost, right? If I needed a fabric for Halloween costumes and there's a really great fabric company, they're still going to have a lot of cost to switch to making my type of fabric or the pattern that I need. So we have to think about what these supplier switching costs are and if we can actually incentivize them to be able to change. Woo, we're getting there. Last one, industry rivals. So we need to think about, when we're thinking about our sustainable industry profit, who else is in our market? If I am producing phones, I have to think about every single other phone company out there. If I'm producing cups of tea, I need to think about the 3 other coffee shops that are in the Edwardsville area, which are all delicious and wonderful, by the way. Oh no, hold on. We just got a new one that opened up. 4 coffee shops in the area that I would be competing against, right? I need to think about how concentrated that market is, what the price and quality is. Turns out can't cook, and I also cannot make very good lattes. So the quality of mine would probably be lower than the other people in Edwardsville making coffee and pastries, right? So maybe my price would have to be lower because maybe my quality is lower. Maybe I can produce less in quantity. So we have to think about industry rivals. How is your business operating relative to these other businesses? What's the timing of the decisions that we make? What sort of government restraints are there when it comes to pricing and quality for this product, or the relationships in between me and my rivals? Because again, you don't want to get in trouble for collusion or have collusion activities. You can't have every single coffee shop in Edwardsville say, oh, you see that new one's opening up. Plemmons Coffee Emporium's opening up. We can't have that. What we're going to do is we're going to put all of our lattes on sale at all these other places at the same time. We're going to run her out of business in the first couple of weeks. Can't do that, right? So we have to think about our industry rivals and the relationship with these industry rivals and the degree of differentiation of my product to their product. So okay, all right, what does this all boil down to? We need to understand so much. It's probably your head swimming. When we're creating a business or we're doing managerial economics, what are we considering? Well, there's a lot of things you have to learn, but that's okay because we're going to learn them through the semester, and hopefully you retain some of it so that I can help you in your own lives, right? About how do you enter a market, and what about the buyers and the suppliers and the rivals, and how your good relates to other goods. Economics is actually, at the end of the day, more of a way of thinking, right? That's why we're a social science instead of a hard science. We're still a science. We do a lot of math. But the reason why we're a social science is because we think about how society reacts to certain goods or services, how decisions can affect relationships. And we try to put a number to that at the end of the day. So I hope by us going through this economics class together, I can teach you a little bit of that way of thinking so that when you approach problems, you're able to think about problems as an economist, where you can start thinking about the next best alternative, or you can think about switching costs, or you can think about the incentives that you have for doing something or not doing something. On understanding incentives, though, we have to think about the changes in profits that's provided by an incentive and how resource holders use their resources. If I have a diamond mine, do I go ahead and quickly sell all of it to every single jeweler, or do I not? I mean, that's the Debris situation, right? Where they own a majority of the diamonds in the world. How does the change in profits that I'm getting for those diamonds, if I was in charge of that company, affect my incentives for how I'm going to provide resources or how I'm going to use resources? We also need to think about within a firm how incentives impact how resources are used and how hard workers work. If you don't pay your workers well, they're probably not working all that hard, right? I'm again going to go back to Staples because, you know, it's just a fun part of my life. I sort of miss those days sometimes. But when I was in Easy Tech, a lot of the time I was not always incentivized to, on top of the computer and the setup for the computer, to also sell like 3 video games, a projector, and a bunch of other things, right? Not always incentivized to do each of that. But sometimes they would have incentives that came in when they noticed that they wanted to sell a new product. So they might be, if you sell 2 Logitech keyboards, you can have an extra hour on your lunch break. Or if you are the top sales in the department this week, you can get some extra holiday pay, or you can get the good shift or the first priority on shifts, or you might even get like a little bit of the profit sharing. Like maybe you get 5 cents for each one of these sales. Well, those sorts of incentives really matter, right? That can affect how hard a worker is willing to work and how they prioritize the certain decisions that those incentives use. This is called a lot of the principal agent problem, because sometimes the people who are working for a company don't always have the same incentives as the people managing or leading the company, right? So how can we use good incentive structures to be able to communicate in between those two? When we're thinking about incentives, we also have to understand markets. So there's 2 sides to every market transaction, right? Very simple, very, very simple. We have buyers and sellers. You know, at the end of the day, we might have some middlemen, we might have some marketing teams, we might have something else, but at the end of the day, every single buying relationship in a market breaks down to 2 key pieces: the person buying the product and the person selling the product, right? So there's a lot of bargaining positions in between the two. Consumers might be able to say, well, I don't really need your product, I can move to something else. Our producers can say, you know what, we understand that you want us to lower our prices, we're not going to do that. And there might be some sort of rivalry that's happened there. We have 3 different types of rivalries that we talk about in the market. The first is consumer producer rivalry. Sometimes the goal of the consumer is not the same as the goal of the producer. I was watching a documentary on Beanie Babies last night. Let's think about Beanie Babies. All right, so the collectors of Beanie Babies just wanted kind of like a cool toy, right? It's like an understuffed like bear or other animals, and because they're understuffed, you can have them sit up. They were humongous craze in the 1990s, and I remember because I just remember just the chaos of Beanie Babies in the 90s. If you have not, or if you're from later than that and you don't remember this time, Google it and just think about how wild people were over this toy. But okay, so the consumers wanted to have a toy. The producers, on the other hand, realized, whoa, hold on. And this happened at first with one elephant that had a limited run, and it was like this dark royal blue elephant. And then they said, you know, dark royal blue is it's not hidden for us. It's not good. Let's change the elephant to a light blue. They changed the elephant for a light blue, and people went crazy wanting the limited edition dark blue ones. They started buying them like crazy. So what did the producer do? Well, the producer said, oh, okay, well, we see that consumers really want just a quality product and they want to own all of them. What we're going to do is we're going to purposely kind of manipulate things. We're going to have limited runs, and then we're going to retire the Beanie Babies. And then we're going to have a similar one that looks almost identical, but it's not. And then we're going to have another limited run, and then we retire the Beanie Babies is what they called them, because they said they went to retirement. People went nuts over it. This is one sort of relationship that we had in between consumers and producers, and a sort of rivalry in between them, where the producers are competing or making decisions based upon kind of not misleading, but interpreting the wants of the consumers to kind of force them to purchase more, right? We also have consumer rivalry. You probably understand this one a lot. Have you ever been to a store on Black Friday and there are very few of something left? Well, then I've worked a few Black Fridays in my life. Then you might have 2 people who are like, well, I'll pay you an extra $10, or you know what, I really deserve this good because I prioritized it. You don't need that other customer over there. You don't need that other customer. No, give me the TV, the big screen TV. There might be some sort of consumer to consumer rivalry where they might be both wanting the same product, or they might both be upset with the same product, or they might want the product to change in different ways. So there might be, for example, let's say that there were the Beanie Babies back in the 1990s. There were some people who really wanted the next round of the Beanie Babies to be orange, and some people who really wanted the next round of the Beanie Babies to be pink. And they would fight, and they would write into the company, and they would do lots of different things, and then they would try to purchase all the ones of the color that they liked in the hopes that more of those colors came out. There was consumer to consumer rivalry where they were sort of using their market forces to be able to try to get an advantage on each other. Then we have producer rivalry. This is one you're probably most familiar with. Have you ever noticed that right when, I think it was Verizon who did it first, Verizon came out and said, I will pay the switching costs if you want to move your phone plan to us. Then all of a sudden, AT&T came in and they said, we'll pay your switching costs plus give you a little bit of money on your next phone. And then T-Mobile came in and they said, you know what, we'll help pay your switching costs and we will give you unlimited data that works in 106 countries. And then it just kept going and going and going. Well, these are also producer rivalries that happen because either they want the same customer market or they want the same types of resources. What I mean by same types of resources is producer rivalry is not only on being able to sell a good, it's also in being able to have a better ability to sell that good. It could be, we see a lot of this when it comes to back when malls were actually popular in the 1970s and 80s. You'd see a lot of companies that would like bid to be able to try to get the best spots in the mall. Actually, here's a really interesting one. Do you all know why Cinnabon is almost always located by the escalators in malls? There's actually been constant lawsuits about it because other stores have tried to take these spots. They say, oh, well, you need to be in the food court. But why they locate nearby escalators, typically not in the food court, is because the heat and the smell from the oven, which they put as close to the front of the store as legally possible, kind of wafts upwards so that people smell them while they're on the escalators and they're more likely to stop in. They found out that like sales increased by like 34% when they started doing that. Like it was an insane number, and that's why they continue to do it. Well, them continuing to pay higher and higher prices for these spots, or having exclusive contracts where they negotiate with people who own lots of different malls. That's one way that they're kind of having a rivalry with the other people who would like that space. Corner spaces are always great for jewelry stores. So jewelry stores might want those spaces, but Cinnabon also does. So how do they compete with one another? How are they rivaling for the same like peak location or peak customer base? We also need to understand that everything that we understand about markets can be affected by regulation. So if there's a good strategy that could be something that goes against regulatory responsibilities, there could always be a way of like, you need to maintain this type of quality product, or you need to service this many customers in a disadvantaged area, or you need to be able to produce X, Y, and Z, and have some of it set aside in the case of emergencies for housing or something like that. So the government can affect the market by putting in regulations, and the regulations tend to come in two types. It's either on the price, how much you can charge for something, and it might be an upper limit or a lower limit. We're going to talk about that in the next video, or in the quantity and how much quantity you can produce of a good or service. Anyways, I've already taken you through so much. You're probably exhausted. So go ahead, turn off this video in a second, shake it out, feel okay. Next, we're going to go back into the very basics of supply and demand graphs. You might not have seen it since like undergrad or high school, but don't worry, we're going to go back through it. I'm going to draw a few graphs up on the board and talk to you about what each piece of it means. So if we use it later on in the course, you're going to have a good concept and understanding of that. All right, everybody, see you at the next one.